everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Get Ready. And very excited today to bring to you one of the real pioneers in this work. And Fred, I hope you don't mind me using the word pioneer.
I'll get out my, David Crockett.
I was a Davy Crockett Explorer Canoe Scout at Disneyland, so I had a Davy Crockett outfit.
Okay.
But that's a whole other side.
Yeah. Well, that's for another conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Sure. A lot of tapping to do around that. But yes, Fred Gallo is a clinical psychologist and one of the pioneers in energy psychology and former president of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, and a really great guy. And I'm really excited to bring him here to you today. And welcome, Fred.
Hey, thank you, Brad. Nice to get a chance to talk to you again.
Yeah.
And your audience.
Yeah. So now, how did you get from clinical psychology into this weird tapping stuff?
Oh God, yeah. I guess I started off sort of traditionally. I studied client-centered therapy, Carl Rogers stuff, psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral, Gestalt. I was always kind of like looking for something. And at one point, very early on in my clinical training, is I came across the work of Milton Erickson, and through Jay Haley, and I'd always been interested in hypnosis too, because actually when I was a kid, I around 15, 16, I had hypnotized my brother, and I was hypnotizing people in the neighborhood. So I was always kind of like, on the fringe kind of. And but anyway, so then from studying Erickson's work, and I studied with some of his students. I never got a chance to meet Erickson himself. He had died by the time I was getting ready to see him. But I spent time with Bandler and Grinder and Delosier and Diltz, and the founders of NLP. And I even presented on NLP in the 80s. And I was actually invited to present at a conference that they had there in Dallas, Texas. And I got a chance to meet the Smothers Brothers there too, by the way. Okay, you know who they were? Yeah, the Smothers Brothers.
I'm not as young as I look, Fred.
Okay, yeah, I thought you were, yeah. But anyway, the Smothers Brothers. So we had come up, myself and a colleague, we had come up with a comical rendition of NLP called Neurlinguini come si chiama. And it was an Italian version, and we had all these kind of like, it was, isomorphic to different techniques and so on. We had, instead of metaphor, we had tutelamistori. Instead of anchoring, we had peppering. We had, instead of strategies, we had strategini. And so we had all this thing. So anyway, and it had developed while we were, doing our certification training with Bandler and Grinder and, Diltz and so on. And so anyway, they invited us to come and present. And so we presented this comical rendition, which was very funny. It was very funny and very much, and a lot of ad-libbing too in the moment. But, the Smothers Brothers were there. They presented, and they came up to me and they said, we haven't seen you on the circuit. And I said, well, I'm not on the circuit. So what do you mean? And Tommy Smothers, I'm talking to him. I said, well, I'm a psychologist and John is a social worker. And we just kind of came up with this thing, And he said, hey, Dickie, come over here. He calls his brother over. He says, these guys aren't really comedians, And so then they hooked us up with their agent, who took us out to dinner and wanted to start sponsoring us to be on the circuit. He said, within 6 months, I can have you on the Johnny Carson show. Well, John was all excited about it. But as we left there, I said, John, I really don't want to do that. I don't see my profession as being a comedian. I mean, I like to do comedy, but it would be comedy with teaching and, that sort of thing. And so I never really followed up on that, But anyway, as far as, so that was the NLP part. And over time, I got kind of like bored with, because there were certain things that, sometimes I was able to help a person resolve a phobia, but it was a lot of work. It was a lot of like, getting them to go into a third person position and anchoring it.
Right.
It could work, but it was tough, right? And I also found cognitive therapy to be it was hard, to try to convince somebody to think differently, to challenge their thinking. It was a lot of work. And so then I just tell you, it was in 1992. I read an article. It was written by Roger Callahan, and it was about treating addiction. And I read the article, and I'm agreeing. And then all of a sudden he says, the solution is to have people tap. And I'm going, what does he mean to tap? I mean, I could follow that there was an anxiety at the root of addiction. Yeah. There were that the craving was really a kind of anxiety, and the person was using a tranquilizer to settle that anxiety. They would turn to a drug or whatever. And then he goes, and it's because of an energy system in the body that's awry. And I said, well, I could think of that. I mean, I'm sure the neurons firing and all that. I'm thinking, yeah. He said, and then the solution is tap. You have them tap under their eye and have them tap under their arm. I thought, this guy's nuts, and I got this image in my mind because I find out he's in California. Okay, well, California, and he lives in the desert. Okay, now I didn't know much about the desert there. I mean, it was Indian Wells, which is a very beautiful area in the desert, and so I imagined that he was. That here's this guy who was a psychologist. He was working with people and he wasn't getting results. And finally, he became delusional, and he figured that the solution was to have people tap. And I imagined that he was living in a hovel, and that he had long, straggly hair, and scabies, and this is this intrusive thought comes, and I just looked at it and laughed, and said, well, I don't know, But then here's the thing. About, I don't know if it was 2 weeks or a month later, a woman came in to see me that had an addiction to pain pills, and I did my standard routine, and and one of the things I did is something called rational motive imagery. And I could have her get in touch with the urge, and then I could take her through changing what she said to herself and the way she pictured things, and the urge would come down. Okay, but then if I'd ask her to get it back again, she could get it right back up again, and that didn't seem unusual. I mean, of course, although I always hoped to find something that would cure, and. But then as I'm doing this, I thought, I looked at it, I said, I read this really crazy article recently, okay? This guy says that the certain tapping is supposed to help. I said, would you be willing to try it just as an experiment? Now, look, I really built confidence up there, right? I mean, this was, she was chomping at the bit. No, she wasn't. She was just willing to go along with this crazy thing. So I have her think about it again. And I say, now just follow me and do this. And I'm tapping under my eyes and I'm tapping under my arm. That's all I knew, under the eye and under the arm. That's all I knew. And so she's doing it. We're going back and forth. And it settles the urge down. And then I said, okay, now get it back. And she could get it back, but she couldn't get back as much. Instead of getting back up to a 10, she was only able to get up to a 4. I said, well, let's try some more. So we did some more and more, but she could always get it back up to a 4. But I thought, this is amazing. How can this be? And then I, theorized like, well, maybe it's because I did rational motive imagery first, or maybe I just tricked her. Maybe I build up confidence at this. And I thought, well, I didn't really build up any confidence. I told her I thought it was nuts, I thought, well, maybe I just distracted her. But then when I try to have her think about it again, I mean, she wasn't distracted then, so it was just really mind-boggling. Okay. So I figured I got to get in touch with this guy. Because I thought, I should be able to take it even further than we have. So I reached out and I found out, first of all, I couldn't find the article. Eventually I found the article and I see Roger Callahan. Huh. Okay. Where is he? Indian Wells, California. Okay. And there was information about contacting him. So I called and he was out of town at the time. And I talked to his wife, Joanne. And I said, I see he says something about 5-minute phobia cure too. I said, I've used NLP, and I've gotten results with that at times. I said, is it anything like that? And she said, no. It's very different than that. She said, it's, I have to say it's more efficient. I said, oh, okay. Well, what all can you do with this method? I mean, I've treated somebody with an addiction. It seems to help. She said, oh, yeah, it helps with that too. It helps with a lot of things, I said, well, how can I find out? Can I talk to him? He says, well, he's out of town right now, but I'll give him the message so he'll call you. And I said, is there any kind of materials I can get? And so she told me about some materials. So I bought these materials, some videos, some audio tapes, some manuals. And I really started getting into it, and I got obsessed with it. Okay, and then I started. He and I then started talking, and we developed a nice relationship. And I was reading all these materials, and I even started reading his sources. Like I had seen that he had done some work with John Diamond, so I read John Diamond's work. That he had studied some of applied kinesiology. So I got George Goodhart's work. I talked to George Goodhart. I started getting in touch with the people that were involved in that circle and their materials, and then Roger he was very generous with things. He would say, oh, you ought to read Robert O. Becker, and was an orthopedic surgeon who did some research on meridians and regeneration. And so I've looked at that. The Body Electric was one of his books, or several other things that he had written. So anyway, I really got involved in it. And Roger then, he invited me to come out to his place. And he said, there's certain people in the world, different areas that are interested in this work. And I'm inviting them over to my place. And I'd like to invite you. And just as, just come as my guest, he said. And, no fee, just come as my guest. Okay. And I said, well, Roger, I said, who's going to be there? And so he tells me about some of these people. And I knew a couple names that I said, geez, Roger, I said, I'm just a peon. I'm just a country doctor, And he goes, no, Fred, he goes, you know what you're doing. I said, well, I think I know something of what I'm doing, but I'm sure these other people know a lot more than I know. He goes, Fred, believe me. He goes, you really know what you're doing. He says, I know you don't have a basis for compare. So I didn't know, it's like you're thinking other people have been studying this and must be really at a higher level, right? So I just was honestly felt, yeah, I'm studying, I'm a student. That's, anyway, so I went out to California.
And have you tap on that?
Yeah, that's already been tapped out. Okay. So anyway, so I went out to California, I went to his place and met with all these other people. And what was interesting is while I was there and we're talking and doing different things together, demonstrating. And I come to realize that, I mean, these people are like looking at me as though I'm the leader. And other than Roger, of course, but it's like, and I start to realize, boy, there's a lot of things they don't know. How do they not know that? How do they not know this, because they weren't maybe as obsessed about it as I was. I don't know. But it just kind of like shocked me that they, not to putting them down, it's just that I was surprised that I knew as much as I knew. Okay. And then Roger and I hung out together. I remember we were sitting around the day before I was going to leave. And he said, Fred, he says, I only treat people on the phone. And he said, and there must be about 600 people that could call me at any time. Now, we've been just sitting here. He says, now there was one call where a guy was having, addictive, he was going through withdrawal. And I took him through tapping. And he says, and it settled it down. Okay. I was there while he did it. It's just like, and I'm thinking, you can settle down withdrawal by tapping. I mean, you would think the person needs to be in the hospital. Okay. But he did that, and he was using what he calls his voice technology, but he wouldn't let me see what he was doing. A lot of people thought it was a machine. It wasn't a machine, but but it was private, what you could, what it was. And, but anyway, what ended up happening is I started with his blessing. I went around starting to teach people within a limited amount. I wasn't allowed to teach the diagnostic procedure. The thing was, though, I had already developed a diagnostic procedure before getting there because I looked at Diamond's work, I looked at kinesiology, and I started to kind of like, what do they call it in engineering when you back?
Reverse engineer?
Reverse engineering. Yeah, reverse engineering. I was doing that sort of thing with it. It wasn't exactly what Roger was doing, but it was good enough to get a result. Okay. And, but then, and he kept asking me, why don't you come and study with me? He says, there's some other benefits, besides, come and do the certification training with me. So I decided to do it. And then with his blessing, I went out and I started teaching. And I went first in Pennsylvania, and then some people from Texas came up and invited me to Texas. And then some people from Colorado, actually Roger referred these people from Colorado who wanted somebody to train them. And he said, go see Fred Gallo. And I went out to Colorado, Indian Wells, not Indian Wells, Colorado Springs and Denver. And then I different places in Ohio and New York and DC, and it just started happening. And then I went into Canada. And then at some point, my book, I published this book, and energy psychology, and I coined the term energy psychology. And it actually came out of a discussion that I was having with Charles Figley, because Charles Figley had attended one of the workshops that I did in Florida, like in Tallahassee area at Florida State University. And he contacted me after I contacted him about, I said, I got a pretty good idea about why these different techniques work. EMDR, thought field therapy, visual kinesthetic dissociation, Gerbaudy's approach called traumatic incident reduction. And so I wrote a couple articles on that. And it was published in his electronic journal of traumatology. But then after that, he contacted me. He said, Fred, would you like to write a book? And I said, yeah, I'd like to write a book about it. And so then I wrote the book, Energy Psychology. We had dickied around about what the title would be. At first, I was going to call it Therapy by Energy. And he said, well, that's a nice title, but maybe something a little more professional. And so then it became energy psychology, explorations at the interface of energy, cognition, behavior, and health. Wow, big mouthful, right? And it kind of was a hit, it was a hit, and it had a lot. And actually, before David and they did ASEP, there was a woman, Kate Sorenser, and she started taking people around that were using these approaches. And she contacted me one day because they were going to do the first I call it Congress because from Germany, first conference. And she said, would you come and do the keynote? She says, after all, you literally wrote the book, and we're going to call it energy psychology. And so I went there, and and Gary Craig and I, we knew each other from then too, because he was one of the earlier ones too with Roger. And Gary he did a conference in San Francisco area, and I presented there in that. And a lot of different people, like Larry Nims did, and Tappis, and I kind of helped get Tappis introduced to the field, because she and I got in contact with each other, and we were having regular contact, and then got her to meet Roger, and Roger thought that her name Tappis. He goes, well, when did you start tapping? And she says, I don't tap. Well, and he was thinking Tappis tapping, that was just the name she was given, But anyway, that's kind of how it got started. And then, and by the way, one of the things is when I was after the book Energy Psychology was published, then I had energy tapping, and then energy diagnostic and treatment methods. And one day there's a lot of synchronicity involved here, right?
Yeah.
This publisher from Germany, Alfred Schutz, he was at Stanford University, and he was going through the bookstore. And in the bookstore, he found my book, Energy Psychology. So he picks it up, and he starts looking through it. He buys the book. He went back, and this is crazy. I mean, you're on vacation, right? So he goes back to his hotel, and he sits there reading the book, right? So then he calls my office and talks to my secretary, Judy, at the time. And he said, I would like to talk to Dr. Gallo about this book. He says, this is amazing. And he was very complimentary about it. And so Judy calls me and says, I didn't think you would mind him calling you, because he said he wanted to publish your book in German. I said, no, that's good. And so he called me, and we talked, and he said he wanted to do that book. I says, I have 2 other books. He says, I want to publish them all. And so I said, well, I have to hook you up with the publishers, because I don't own the copyright just by myself. It's with the publisher. So I hooked him up with, CRC Press, W.W. Norton, and New Harbinger. Those are the 3 publishers I was using at the time. And so then those books became translated into German. And next thing I know, this psychotherapist in Germany had really noted Gunther Schmidt. Gunther Schmidt is a physician, but he studied with Milton Erickson, and he very systemic approach to his work. And so a friend of his had gotten a copy of my book that was translated in German, and she sends it to Gunther and says, Gunther, you need to read this thing. And so he reads it. Anyway, he reaches out to me, he calls me, and he says, with his German accent, he says, Dr. Gallo, I read your book, and it works, and I don't know what I'm doing. He says, so I figure I have to have you come here. And so he arranges for me to present at the Milton Erickson Congress in Bad Orb, Germany. But he says, to make it worth your while, he says, we can't pay you a lot for that, but he says, we'll take care of your travel and all that. And he says, but I could do a little workshop in Heidelberg, and maybe I'll get 35 people, something like that. And he says, and it maybe make it worth your while. I said, well, that'd be nice. And it's funny because a few weeks before I'm supposed to go, he contacts me again and he says, would it be okay if there was more than 35 people? And I said, well, what do you got in mind? And he said, well, right now, he says 65 people want to come. I said, he says, do you have a limit? I said, no. I said, Gunther, the more the merrier. Okay. So he says, okay. So and they got like 140 people or something like that. And they filmed it. They videoed the whole thing. And then that became marketed throughout Germany. And so I started doing certification trainings in Germany there. I had already done a certification trainings in Pennsylvania, in the US and Canada, but now I was taking it over to Europe. And so I went to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Norway, Italy. Where else did I go? I don't know. Africa, different places in Africa. Tony Robbins reached out to me. Okay. He had, you know who he is, Tony Robbins?
Yeah.
Okay. So Tony, it's funny. I got a call one day. This would have been in early 2000, maybe 2003, 2004. I have to look back. But this woman calls me. Here's another synchronicity. It's wild. I came home from a trip from Germany or wherever, and Tony Robbins is on TV, and he's selling some product, right? And my wife's sitting there, and she's looking. I go, "What do you think of him?" And she goes, "Well, he seems like he's a pretty good salesman." I said, I used to think that he was really. I didn't think much of him, okay, because he said he was the foremost trainer in NLP, and I knew that wasn't true, but there's something about him that I like now. I think he's spiritual too. And I said, I'd really like to meet him. I just said that. I just said, I'd really like to meet him. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. This woman says, Dr. Gallo, you don't know me. My name is Janet Van. I said, no, I don't think we've ever met. She goes, well, I work for Tony Robbins. Do you know who that is? I said, yeah, I know who that is. She goes, well, Tony would like you to come to Fiji to present to a select group of people on your energy psychology work. And I said, okay. I said, well, why does he want me to come? And I said, there's, and she said, well, Tony says you're the man. I said, well, I think I'm one of the men, and actually there's women too in the field, He goes, no. He says you're the one. You really are the man. I said, well, that's nice. I mean, that's complimentary, but I said, I think that's saying too much. But he goes, well, he would like you to come over, and we would like to arrange something for that. And you could even bring your wife with you, and We'll put you up this beautiful place. We have this. He has a resort. It's called Namale. We'll treat you like royalty, and all you have to do is come and present for about an hour and a half. I said, wait a second, you're going to fly me all the way to Fiji to talk to people for an hour and a half? I said, you should set up more time than that. I'm used to going and speaking for hours and hours and hours to people. I don't know how much I can teach them in an hour and a half. And he goes, well, maybe we could work out some extra time, we could try that. I says, well, okay, what are we talking about? What are we? Well, we'll fly you business class and put you up in the resort, and we'll pay you X number of dollars. Now this is crazy, okay? So I say, that's not much money. I can't believe I said that. I said, I usually get a lot more than that whenever I go to Germany and so on. I said, I got to be away from my practice and stuff. It wasn't bad what they were offering, but it wasn't what I was used to. Okay. And she said, well, what would you want? And I told her what I wanted. I said, well, I would want at least this, I'm not going to talk numbers, but then, and she said, well, I'm not authorized to do that. I said, but she says, well, if I'll have to talk to Tony about it, but if they can't do that, could you recommend somebody else? I said, yeah, there's other people. There's Peter Levine, not Peter Levine. There's, I recommended a couple of people. Mm-hmm. And she said, oh, he had them come before.
They weren't the man.
I said, oh, I said, well, they're good. Yeah, but he really wants you to come. I said, well, just tell him, see what happens. And so she calls me back a couple of days later and says, you're on. Okay. Tony said, whatever you want. And so then I find out, because Tony tells me the story when I finally get to Fiji. He says, my wife and I we're under a lot of stress. There were a lot of things happening, getting sued. There's always stuff when you're, and he said, we were in a bookstore and she's standing here. And I look at her and I said, the answer to our problem is, and I reach past her and I grab this book on the shelf and I pull it out. And it's energy tapping. I said, the solution to our problem is this book. And so we went home and we read the book and we started doing some of this stuff and we found it helped. And so then I figured I should get you to, and it's like, wow. Same thing with the German publisher,
Right.
Weird. It's almost like there's a spiritual force somewhere, and it's, I don't know how that works. Synchronicity. Jung talked about it. It's just. Anyway, so now energy tapping, or the tapping toolbox. That's my latest book.
The latest book. I mean, I just love the whole, for anyone watching who has been a skeptic when you first heard about tapping. This is such a classic story. Here you are, a clinical psychologist. You hear about this, and, oh, that's nuts. Yeah. And then you coin the term energy psychology, become the president of the ASF, and have now written several books, excellent books. I have a number of Fred's books, and now this newest one, the Tapping Toolbox.
Yeah, the Tapping Toolbox. What happened? See, I was presenting some for PESI. I did a few workshops for them, and then of course, COVID hits, and so then I quit traveling. I wasn't going to Germany anymore, so I did the last workshop I did for PESI was an online thing, okay, which isn't a lot of fun because, I like to see the people. I like to have that interaction with the people,
Oh, I know.
Oh, God. But anyway, I did it, but it's almost like talking to air. I wonder how some of these, like you probably don't get to see the people that you're talking to much if you're doing to a whole audience. So you're talking to air, and it takes a certain talent to do that. And I don't have that talent as well. I'm talking to you, I can feel that connection there. Okay. But if I'm talking to a blank screen, it's like, I don't know. There's something about the connection with the people that's important. But anyway, so I wasn't doing, I had done that one last workshop, and then the people that were sponsoring me to go and do the workshops asked if they wanted to refer me to the publishing company because they were maybe interested in a book, and so they contacted me, and so I started talking with this woman, Kate Sample, who was like the acquisitions editor, and we talked, and they said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, want me to write a book? I mean, I would do this, I have some things I've been doing over time that have gone a bit beyond what I was doing before. And so I gave them an outline, and so we started working on the book. Actually, I really got carried away in writing. I ended up having something like 60 or 70,000 words or something like that. And it ended up being cut down to about 40,000 words, or, so they just chop, 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 chop. And they would say, Fred, this isn't really supposed to be an autobiography. Because I'd get carried away with, like, one of the chapters is about my history and my history. So it's like how to, kind of like what we just got done talking about and some other things. Okay. Right. And it shows, where you got to that and why that was important, and it kind of gives people a sense of that. But I went way more. My wife always says I do too many words. So I guess it was right to trim it down. But it goes into that, and then, the history with, what Roger did. But there's a lot of history in the book Energy Psychology that is not in this. And there's some other things in this that are not, that weren't in Energy Psychology. And so I go through, I add a thing that I didn't talk about in other books, and a preparation kind of thing, which I call the Relita model. And what that is it's like, well, how do you talk to people? What do you do when you're interacting with them, first of all? And there's a certain kind of energy that you can create and so on by this. And so the Relita model is like, the first thing is your rapport, your relationship with the person. And how do you have that sort of thing? What is that kind of thing like? And I think of something I call the Michelangelo principle, where Michelangelo, he believed that the figure was already embedded in the stone and he was helping to free it. Well, the health is in the person right there. And so you keep your eye on that and you relate to that. And so you believe that it's there, even if that's just delusional, but I don't think it is. But even if it were, it's good to be in that state. And here's one of the values of it. I found through my travels, if I had two people, they're interacting with each other, and I noticed this from my own experience, is that if I got caught up in feeling like, oh God, I don't know if I can help this person, or they're really kind of disturbed. Oh geez, my energy drops. Okay. And if my energy drops, what does that do for them? Okay, because there's this resonating of energy. Okay. So I think as I keep my eye on the ball, which is kind of like the soul, the health within the person, that helps to keep my energy up, and I'm resonating in that way, and that helps to bring them out. That helps to bring them up. Okay, so that's the first step. Okay, and then
you'll notice the.
Oh yeah, David, I just see that David there.
The Michelangelo principle is behind everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh God, wow.
When you said that, it's like.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
we're
just tapping away what doesn't belong to reveal the masterpiece inside.
Right. Yeah, I see it like there was a physicist, a guy by the name of Christian Huygens from Netherlands, and he made pendulum clocks. And what he found was that he noticed that all these pendulum clocks were swinging in synchrony. And he realized, it just hit him, that how can that be? How can that really be? So he stopped them and started them all up, disarray. Mm-hmm. And within a certain period of time, I don't know what that time is, but they were back in sync again. Yeah. And it became clear that that's what happens. And then later physicists found out that the clock with the strongest spring rules, the others would synchronize to it. And so I started thinking, that fits in with that principle. Because if you, as the therapist or the coach or the salesperson or whatever, you as the communicator, if you are the strongest spring, then that person, that other clock will synchronize to you. Okay? And if we're doing it ethically, okay, which is what we want to do, right? Then we're focusing on the health. And that helps to bring out that help, that security and everything that person gets to feel. And then while they're doing that, while you got that kind of state, then you go into the second element of it, which is, this is all at the same time in a way, is you ask them, why are you here? What can I do for you? What do you want to make happen? So you're inquiring and you listen as you question and ask and be in this state. And you don't have to do a lot of work. You just ask questions and you listen, you ask questions and listen, and you stay centered. And then at some point out of the blue, bam, it occurs. And you go, oh yeah. And then you check it out. You ask them and you check it out, and then you deliver. Okay, and it may be tapping, but it could be something else. Okay, you don't want to be limited. Okay, you don't want to say that this is the only way it can be. If you only have one way, then you don't have much requisite variety. Okay, you don't have as many tools to help that person achieve what they want. So, and then what you do is you deliver, and then you see what happens. And if it hits the mark, a change occurs. Okay, that change may occur instantaneously. That change may occur at the next session, in between. I don't know. It occurs when it occurs. And then if it doesn't occur, then you do an adjustment, and you go back to the drawing board, and you listen again, and you rapport, and you da. So that's one of the elements that I do in the book, which is the preparation part of the preparation. I mean, and then there's other things in preparation, like you want to know is the person, are they on board, or are they reversed? Okay, and in what way are they reversed or on board? There's many levels of being reversed or resisting, or whatever you want to call it, and so it brings that out, and then it talks about, well, okay, so how do we tap? And there's lots of ways to tap, but what I do is I kind of model, say, like maybe 4 ways, and I highlight EFT with a couple little modifications, TFT, a kind of comprehensive algorithm from TFT, but TFT is more than just one algorithm, but I showed one that's used a lot that could get a result. And then I have one that I developed I call midline technique, and I outlined that. And then I show something called the TW3, which is the triple warmer 3 method, which can be used for depression and pain. And it goes into different, there's a chapter on treating pain. There's a chapter on treating depression, anxiety and phobias, and trauma. And so, it's funny because I was getting toward the end, and I was going to not do the chapters on depression and anxiety. And I said, because I have so many, it's too big already, And they said, no, well, we're chopping it up for you, Fred. And they said, no, please.
I'll tell you what you don't need.
Do the chapter on depression and anxiety. I said, okay, good. I thought I was already done. And then it was good because I took a closer look at anxiety, and from a the DSM-4, DSM-5, and what are some of the elements, and what could be the reversals involved in it, and what could be the different aspects of generalized anxiety, the different aspects of those, and how would we tune those in, and so on. So I kind of lay that out. And I have a troubleshooting chapter that I call trouble tapping. And it's like, whenever you're not getting a result, what are some other things you can do? Okay. And it looks at not just tapping, but there's things like just holding points, or imagining holding points, or something called the container technique, where you kind of put it off in a container, and then and then you tap, and every once in a while you check on what's in the container. Gary had a similar thing he calls the tearless trauma technique that I had, but it's a little different because you actually visualize putting it in this container, and you can put several elements in the container, and then you go back to just tapping, and every once in a while I'd say, well, take a guess what it would be if you checked into the container, and eventually you go into the container and you find out it's usually down, and if it isn't, you say, well, let's just keep it there, let's do a little more, and just little strategies that whenever you need a little extra help there, and I show things like how to correct for switching, by the hookup and things of that nature. And then I emphasize the outcome projection procedure, which I covered in energy diagnostic and treatment methods. But it's like after you think of it this way, you don't always need this, but you've got this stress. Even in acupuncture, they will say it's easier to sedate than it is to tonify. Okay, that's a standard understanding in acupuncture. So if you have, let's say, too much yang, okay, so it's active, which you could call that sympathetic nervous system. And so if I bring it down, okay, that's easier to do, whether you're using herbs or whether you're using needles or suction or whatever they do. But then to bring up, let's say, if it's too low of yang and you want to tonify it, or too low of yin and you want to tonify, that's considered to be more difficult, I guess, in the field. But I look at it like the basic model would be, if you've got distress, you bring the distress down first of all. And sometimes when you bring it down, that takes care of it, because the person is now, they have access to their wisdom, they have access to their feeling of security. But sometimes to make sure that it continues, and I'm sort of stealing this idea from NLP, future pacing, but we do it with some tapping. And you create, how do I want to be the next time I'm in that situation? And you bring that to mind and you tap on that. Okay. Sometimes all you have to do is tap triple warmer 3, or sometimes you may tap all the EFT points or whatever. So I cover stuff like that. And then there's a very little chapter. It was a longer chapter, but they really tuned it down as the future. And it just says something about directions we'll go in. And I give an example in there of like, I was diagnosed many years ago with a certain kind of cancer. I never had to have treatment for it other than I had a surgery. Because when I was getting ready to go after the pathology report, and I was going to go see the oncologist, and they were going to do all these assessments on me, I started doing things like treating myself. And I would do this, I would do things like this. I would go, even though I have this cancer, I accept myself. And I choose to, and I'm open to a miracle or whatever, okay? Even if I always have cancer, I accept myself. And even if I deserve to have cancer, even if there's an identity, even if there's a loyalty issue involved in my having cancer, since my mother died of cancer, I accept myself. So I did that. I was doing those things. And I also would soak in a bath of Epsom salts and baking soda, thinking I could balance my pH. And I paid attention to my diet. And see, I see like people that pull through things like that. I'm observing there's 5 elements, okay, that are involved. One is they've come to terms with their death, first of all. We get it. Yeah, you're going to die. Okay. Just the way it is. Flowers wilt, everything. No, that's okay. And you're not terrified about it anymore. Okay. So you've come to terms. 2, this thing you got, that ain't it. That isn't going to get me. Not that. Something's going to get me, but not that. Okay. So and you're convinced of that. 3rd, the people around you feel the same way. Your closest people, they have the energy of like, nah, Fred's going to pull through it. No problem. 4th thing, you do what your doctor tells you to do. You follow your doctor. You cooperate. You you consult with them, you're on board there without you can maybe make decisions outside of that, but you're mostly cooperative. And then you go overboard. So now you're doing even more. Like you're doing, I don't know, you're doing yoga, you're doing meditation, you're doing tapping, you're doing whatever. Okay. And so I try to put that into effect. Okay. And by the time I went to see the oncologist, and they ran PET scans, and they did my blood work, and they filled me all over, no tumors, and they couldn't find anything. And I got followed for like many years. Like after 5 years, 4.5 years, the oncologist was leaving. He says, Fred, I don't think we're ever going to find anything. He says, you really don't have to follow up. I said, well, I think I'll come one more, once a year for a while and see the next oncologist. But then I stopped doing it. And then after 15 years, I got another little recurrence. But again, it was just in a tumor, and there was nothing elsewhere in my body. So, and again, because I would do this, and I think that's, if we follow the idea of psychological reversal or psychoenergetic reversal, whatever you want to call it, the idea is that when you're healthy, you're going in the direction of health. And when whenever it's an illness, you're going in the direction of illness. It's like you're going opposite of what you ought to be going. It's like I'm going toward the illness rather than away from illness and toward health. And so it's a reversal of the polarity. Okay. And it can manifest in different ways. So there's that element. I thought of one time maybe writing a book called Psychological Reversal that would go into this in a lot of depth. But I think it's kind of out there. I think it's already out there.
And with the Tapping Toolbox, is it intended for the general public, or is it intended as a tool for practitioners, clinicians?
Well, the intention was to do it for both.
Okay. Excellent.
And it's a book that's mostly fairly easy to understand. We were talking before we got started. It's something Einstein said: if you can't explain it, I think he might have even said, if you can't explain it to a sixth grader, if you can't explain it simple enough, you don't understand it. Okay, it doesn't have to be real difficult. Okay. Wisdom is always something simple. It's kind of simple, When we make things too complicated, we're kind of like maybe we're just trying to make ourselves look better or something like that through complication. I don't know, but
some people geek out on that stuff. It's like I'm listening to Robert Sapolsky's book Behave, and somebody's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And then he goes into the complex stuff about the the dopamine traveling from the tegmentum to the nucleus accumbens and the corticoids and all stuff. And using a lot of acronyms, and the ALB is then connected to the TRB and the like.
And now all of a sudden you're lost, right?
It's like, man, if I had, taken neuroscience in college, I'd be totally geeking out on this right now. I've kind of got lost in those.
It can be explained simply, but it's like in neuroscience, you have a lot of Latin words and Greek words, So you have like amygdala, which is just a structure that looks like an almond.
Almond, yeah.
And that's what amygdala means,
Right.
or hippocampus supposedly looks like a seahorse. Some people say it looks more like a jelly roll, but but there are these different structures. And you just say, well, here's what happens. You get a stress response, you get some danger, you perceive a danger, or even if it isn't really a danger, and your amygdala is always on guard, looking for danger, and then all of a sudden these neurons fire into the pituitary gland, the thalamus and the pituitary gland down to the adrenal glands, and And next thing you know, your blood pressure goes up and your heart rate goes up, and you have this peristalsis, where the blood goes away from the surface of the body, and that's just how God designed it.
Fortunately, we have tools for dealing with that.
And we have tools for doing it. We can just distract our amygdala, and if we understand it too, if we understand what's, I think a big part is understanding, because if we understand that our experience is a function of our thought, okay, which is an energy, right? Thought is energy.
Yeah.
It's not solid, so it's not matter. It's like Einstein said, E equals mc squared. So energy equals mass times the velocity of light squared. Okay, so it just speed up that mass enough, it turns into energy. So they're interchangeable, right? It's simple kind of thing. I mean, you see that in nature all the time. So it's not that difficult to understand, okay? But thought is not material. It can go into material. It can start to impact your brain structure and so on. It can start to cause changes in your body and all that. Because you got mind, you've got thought, and you've got consciousness. They're all different forms of energy. Mind is the kind of the reservoir of the energy, right? It's before there's a form. It's just sort of, and then you go into a form, which is thought. And then since we can experience reality, we know we're alive by consciousness, right?
Therefore I am.
Therefore I am. And then if we apply that to thought will feel as though it's real, as if it is a real thing, but it isn't a real thing. It's an energy. And but if we understand that, we really get into that awareness. We realize it's all an inside game. Okay, very much an inside game. And so we got to be careful with the tapping. Okay, as wonderful as it is, as helpful as it is, we could also use it to kind of throw a person off. Okay, because if they think, well, the only way I can feel better is by tapping. If they start thinking that, oh, I got to do this, so now all of a sudden their personal power is out here in this, okay, rather than I can come from a higher level of understanding. I like to use the tapping in the service of that deeper understanding.
Absolutely.
It's a philosophical shift, it's more than a philosophy. It's just how we're structured. It's how we are. And then when you have that, then you're really in a generative state. Then you're gonna grow more and more and more. You can apply it across the board. Okay, it's so that's one of the things I'm trying to convey in the Tapping Toolbox. I don't know that I do a good enough job of it. Okay, I may have to give it another round to tweak it more, but that's where I am with this sort of thing. But I love tapping. I think tapping's great. There's a lot of interesting techniques but use them in the service of higher understanding. Use them. So I'm always cautioning my clients about that. I say, no, we're going to do this. This helps you feel better, but don't be deceived. Okay, don't be deceived. This it's like, and I'll use a metaphor. I'll say, if you broke your leg, and so you put a cast on, and that holds your bones in a certain position, and then what's going to happen is they'll heal. Now, the big mistake would be if you thought you had to keep this cast on for the rest of your life. That would be ludicrous, okay? At some point, you have to take off the cast. Now, when you take off the cast, you're going to find your legs a little shrunken, okay? Yeah, and it's going to take a little extra work, but you'll get there, okay? So you got to do that too, okay? You don't want.
Tapping is a tool for us to be able to use our higher wisdom. It's not the tapping doesn't create the change. It's just a way of helping us
Yeah.
tap into that.
Yeah. Right. Good. That's a good way. It taps into your inner strength, your inner wisdom, your health within. Okay.
For me, it's what clears the fear of change. There's that part of us that has the capacity to live at a higher level, to do things better, to feel better. But we get so in these patterns, and we, crave that homeostasis. And so there's that stress response. So to me, the tapping isn't helping you isn't doing the change. The tapping is calming down the resistance to change, so that
Beautiful.
Now I have this
that.
freedom to do things in a different way.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. It settles down your nervous system. It helps you to step back from and to see things clear. Step back from the thought. You step back from the emotional reaction. You observe it, and everything's impermanent. So it just has a way of settling out. And there you're in touch with. There's the Michelangelo principle. There you got David on the wall there.
I have Davids all over the place.
Yeah, you got the right idea. I guess this is why we were supposed to talk.
My new logo actually has an outline of David inside the A of my name. It's that the masterpiece inside.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. This is like talking to one of the rock stars about living in Laurel Canyon in the 60s and 70s. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the book. At the time that we're recording this, the book is not yet out, but
they said the book will be. He said Friday. Now I don't know if they meant this Friday or next Friday, but it's supposed to be released the 10th of May. But I know they're sending me a bunch of copies this Friday, or it's probably next Friday, because I have to take. It would have taken too long for them to go to Luxembourg. I'm doing a congress in Luxembourg, which the Milton Erickson Institute of Luxembourg, and I'm presenting on trauma, and then the Tapping Toolbox, and I'm doing another little kind of almost like a TED talk on what we just got done talking about the Michelangelo principle, about the principles of our accessing health and wisdom, and so I do a little thing on that. But I'm supposed to bring 40 books with me because it would take too long for them to be shipped there. So I'm going to take one suitcase filled with books.
By the time folks are watching this, there will be a link here to go, and the book will be available. Yeah. And I know it'll benefit a lot of folks. And
I hope so. That's the intention, so that that's my intention.
That's why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's why we do what we do. We want to make some money too, but that's not the driving force. It's
right.
It's the impact, the
impact before income. But income is nice, and the income is necessary so that we can keep doing.
Right. You have to. It's part of the energy of making things happen.
You can't fly to Luxembourg for free.
No, they won't do that for me. I don't know why. And the guy wants the rent paid and the all those things.
Exactly.
So that's fair. Exactly. That's fair. That's just the way the world goes round.
It's the way it works. Well,
Brad, it's great.
Thank you so much. Likewise. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all that you have done, including terming energy psychology, and for your continued work to make the world a better place.
Oh, thank you. You too, by the way. Well, you're doing a lot to make things happen for the benefit of everybody.
Oh, thank you.
We'll talk in the future. You take care.
You too.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.